The future isn't ahead of us, it's within us, right? And it starts in every moment. Mindset is such an important concept in our work, right? When we work with leaders and individuals and even organizations, right? To help really to focus on how our mind, our belief system, our values are interconnected in a way that they help us to shape what's next. But also, I think mindset is pretty hard to change, right? Because it's based on our value system, it's based on our past experiences, on our beliefs and so forth. So I coined the term mind state because I feel like this is a more dynamic way of looking at the world.
The future is a really big thing, and I can imagine for a lot of people there can be any number of emotions attached to it. And I loved reading your book, What's Next is Now, How to Live Future Ready. And you make a pretty big distinction in there between mindset and mind state. I'd like to start there just to have this foundation for how we think about going into the future.
Everybody, not just talks about the future, everybody thinks about the future and probably feels about the future as well, right? It's such a big thing in our lives and on our mind, right? When we think about what's next. And for most, I think the question really comes up a lot, which is, what will the future bring, right? So we wait mostly passively and think like the future will somehow show up, right, in different forms and different ways. But I'd like to give people a different question, and that is, what future do I want to create? Right? And maybe a more important question related to that is, how do I want to be in the future, right? Like, how do I want to show up as an individual in this future, right? And how do I want to feel in the future as well, which is also a related question to that, right? I think that's very important. So do I want to feel safe? Do I want to feel optimistic? Do I want to feel connected? Do I want to feel loved? All of those I think are important feelings that we need to explore deeper, because I think the future isn't ahead of us, it's within us, right? And it starts in every moment. And you mentioned an important thing that I discovered over the last couple of years, which is like the distinction between mindset and mind state, right? I think mindset is such an important concept in our work, right? When we work with leaders and individuals and even organizations, right? To help really to focus on how our mind, our belief system, our values are interconnected in a way that they help us to shape what's next. But also, I think mindset is pretty hard to change, right? Because it's based on our value system, it's based on our past experiences, on our beliefs and so forth. So I coined the term mind state and really brought that to life, I guess, in the book and in other work that I'm doing, because I feel like this is a more dynamic way of looking at the world, right? Because it's your perspective you have in any given moment that determines what's next. And so I think mind state is a hopefully helpful way of thinking about how we engage with the future, how we relate to the future, how we think about the future.
Yeah. And for me, I was thinking about mindset, and I work really hard on it, and I have for decades. So I'm 63, and I can refine it for sure. But it takes a lot of work. And I see with a lot of folks, they don't change so easily. So 100% agree. And then I was thinking about mind state. So how does that apply to my journey? And it's not planning this thing that's decades out into the future. It's how I show up now, and I know how I want to feel. And so I'm taking advantage of opportunities. I can choose to play or not play with whatever comes along. And that keeps me on this direction. And it feels like this big uncertain adventure. It's like I found a new continent. I have no idea what's going to happen when I go onto the shore, but this is how I'm going to show up, and this is how I want to feel. So my interpretation as I was reading your book, the mind state is, it's this powerful tool to have you going in a direction that makes sense to you, that will probably continually evolve. How does that land on you?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that's a beautiful interpretation. And thanks for sharing that, Lee. And I think for me, what you just said really resonates, because that mindset around how, or the way you choose to show up is really important, right? Like, how do you show up in every moment, right? Do you show up open or curious or optimistic or empathetic, right? Those are all like things that you can choose in every moment in how you show up. And um, for me, um, it is important that we ask ourselves, like, what future do we want to create, right? By that question of like, how do we show up in each moment, right? How do we show up with our partners? How do we show up at work? How do we show up in our relationships, in our communities? And I think that's a choice, right, that we have, because you can choose to show up being closed and not open for other people's opinions or perspectives or even values that they share, right? Or you can choose to be open, right? And learn from others, to really be inspired as well, um, to then shape a future that you want to see happening.
Yeah, and for me, how I feel going through life is everything. And so how I show up, and everything else is subordinate to that. And how I choose to show up is be as present as I can be and as curious as I can be. And then from there, innovation and creativity and everything flows, the better I can do that over time. And my only measure, Frederick, is do I feel more fulfilled each year? And that seems to steadily climb, even though happiness comes and goes and a lot of other emotions.
How do you do that? If I may ask, like, if you feel more fulfilled every year, how do you do that? Yes.
Yeah, so I have and again, it's been a while evolving, but this has been here for decades with me now, and it keeps refining. My mission is driving holistic value creation behaviors into the world, and I'm talking about net positive value creation. So material, emotional energy, spiritual. The spiritual piece is about connection with community and whatever's important to each individual. Emotional energy, to me, positive emotional energy, is the scarcest commodity on the planet. And so, with my mission being driving those things out into the world, how well am I doing that, and what kind of impact am I making? So, if I work with a company or I observe a company that makes $1 billion in profit in a quarter, and just a simple example, if they do $2 billion in damage to the environment by polluting it in some way, that's net positive. That's not net positive value creation. And yet I can watch folks in the world that will get excited about being part of making some of that $1 billion. And I look at it and say, even if I've invested $1 million and you guaranteed a $10 million return, I wouldn't do it, because that is not what the world needs. And so I work with nonprofits, for profits, and in the last year, I've been working with families. And in particular, they're going from zero. May last year, we have 37,000 and climbing parents in our dinner table family community, teaching them to raise kids to create value in the world and more intentionally create value as a family. And when I think about legacy over inheritance, we want to build family legacy, material, emotional energy, what it feels like to be in the family, spiritual value creation, connectedness in the family, and we can grow that generationally. So this is foundational curriculum that I've written, and driving it out. Give me 3 or 4 years, will be, I believe, in millions of families. So I look at all these areas of my life. Even now, I'm in my recording studio and wrote an album last year, produced it. We'll write another album this year and record that. It's about positive emotional energy. So all these things are about driving holistic value into the world in all three of those buckets. And it feels pretty darn good. And I think the purpose of life is elevating human consciousness. Simple way to say it, figuring stuff out. The more I figure out, the more value I can create, the better I feel, the easier things become, the less emotionally hijacked you get. And it's a journey. And so how do I just stay right here and do this the best that I can, and not even 1% of what's probably possible? And yeah, I feel more fulfilled every day. That was a really long answer to your question, but that's how I think about the journey.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's very inspiring. And moving more and more families on that journey, I think is, as you said, like very fulfilling work, right? And it's meaningful work. And what really resonates with me is that distinction between materialistic value creation and emotional value creation, right? In my worldview or terminology, I would say like people, when they think about the future, they sometimes think about materialistic goals, right? I want to have a bigger house. I want to have a faster car. I want to have, um, more beautiful clothing, whatever it is, right? That's sometimes a materialistic goal that you have when you think about the future. For me, the more important question is that I ask people is like, what emotion do you want to feel with that materialistic goal, right? What's the bigger house um, triggering in terms of an emotion for you, right? Is that more safety that you want to have? Or what's the faster car kind of like as an emotion helping you to achieve, right? And is that you want to be more seen, right? Or that you want to have more adventure in your life, right? Or the thrill of going fast or whatever that might be, or the clothing, right? Which might relate to that emotion of like being seen and being recognized, being respected, all of that, right? And I think as soon as you go from that materialistic level to like that emotional level and trying to understand um, how can you now um, activate that emotion through through something different, which means like how can you create that sense of safety, of being seen, of being heard, feeling loved, all of those um, emotions that you want to experience in the future. How can you achieve that without going for a materialistic goal? I think then you're on a path that really is enlightening, right? That is really something that gives you a different relationship with your future, that allows you to move in a direction that is first exciting for you because you're now on a path that allows you to explore that emotion that you want to feel in the future. And secondly, I think the likelihood of you achieving that, right, is increasing because now you have more options, more possibilities on how you can actually achieve that emotion that you want to feel in the future.
That makes so much sense. I've been working on it for a really long time. The challenge can be how do we get more people to see that that's the path and start working on it. But and a lot of folks today, it's intentional and mostly unintentional virtue signaling will say, well, it can't be about the money and it's about all this other stuff. But when you look at their actions, it can be 90+% about the money. And I agree with you. It feels so much better when we get the emotional piece of it right, and then I'm really high on the spiritual piece on from a connectedness standpoint. In that, what kind of community do I want to be part of? And I think we've been drifting away from that in the United States, and I think a lot of the world drifting away from having a really strong, supportive, healthy community. So, what's your advice on like getting more folks to actually see this? Because I think they intellectually understand it. They don't really know how to take the step.
Absolutely. Yes. I think communities are so important, right, in our lives. And, the latest studies tell us that the most important ingredient for a fulfilling, for a long, for a happy life is your relationships, right? And so that ingredient is something that you can invest in, right? Your relationships, the quality and the quantity of your relationships. And you can start by doing that within your communities that you're part of, right? Your neighborhood community is probably the best way to start. And so when we moved here into the Santa Cruz Mountains, we are part of a small community. And we observed that people didn't know each other, right? They were living with each other in proximity for 30, 40, 50 years, not kind of like getting to know each other, right? And kudos to my wife, Angela. She changed that because the moment we showed up, right, we hosted kind of like gatherings in our place, right? Invited all the neighbors. We We knocked on doors and introduced ourselves. We offered help, right? When we saw like people needed help in their garden or whatever it was. And that started to become like, I wouldn't say a tradition, but it now starts to become like a big part of that community that every other month, right? Somebody is inviting all the neighbors to come over, right? For just a gathering, just to check in with each other, to see how it's going, to support each other and so forth. And that is truly magical because you can learn so much from your neighbors, right? Around what's on their mind, what is their daily life about, right? So we have neighbors here who are artists, right? We have neighbors who are um, running large quinoa farms, and they have 2 llamas. We have neighbors who are um, um, uh, retired, successful CEOs, right? And like all of those people, when you bring those together, it's really magical because then you're connecting on a more human level. You're connecting not about your careers, but you're connecting about like, how do you feel in this world, right? What future do you want to create, and what are you doing to create that future, right? And it's very inspirational. And the last time we had this gathering at a neighbor's house, um, our neighbor, she created actually a book about the neighborhood, about the last 50 years of that neighborhood and how it grew, how it evolved, how it changed, right? And she gave that book to everyone in the neighborhood, and it was her like passion project and her hobby for the last year, right? And you really saw when she shared that with us that she lighted up. She was very happy doing that meaningful work and investing in the community. So I think that's something everybody can do, right? It's not a big deal to be open to your neighbors and invite them over, and also reaching out if neighbors need help, right? And you can do something for them. All of those things lead to not just a stronger community, but it leads to a better future for yourself, right? So it leads to something that makes you happy, that makes you feeling fulfilled, that leads to better relationships, which means that you feel more connected, right, in the places that you are. And I think that's something very powerful that everybody should probably do more of.
Yeah. And that's something everybody can do. It's not that hard to do. I imagine even a ritual. Hey, once a month, we're going to have a neighborhood barbecue or something where we all get together and the kids play, adults play games, whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, as you said, like it's not so hard to do, but it's mostly something that we don't focus on, right? We focus mostly on, not just that small circle that is in our proximity, which is our neighborhood or the school community or the sports community that we're part of or the religious community, whatever it is, right? We mostly focus on the world that is very distant, that is out of our control, right? That is happening somewhere else by someone else, right? And I think that's occupying our minds too much, right? Instead of like getting up in the morning and saying like, hey, what can I do for my community this week or this month, as you said, right? Like, what's my contribution to it? And I've learned that at a place that is really close to my heart, and that is Burning Man, right? Where we go every year. And one of the major things when this community of 40,000 or 50,000 people comes together for 10 days, right? And it's literally like a small city that is built in the middle of the desert in Black Rock City, and that also dissolves right after 10 days, right? And nothing is left behind. What is amazing to me is that community is built on a couple of principles that are really important. And I think those principles really, whenever I experience those in those 10 days, I bring those back into what I call the default world or the default kind of like environment. And one of the principle is around gifting, right? That you gift something into the community. and you think about that question very hard, like what's your contribution to that community, right? Is it a workshop that you run? Is it food that you provide? Is it kind of like just a hug that you give to strangers, right? Is it that you do some coaching or some meditation or breath work with someone else, right? It can be anything, right? Because everybody has something that they can contribute to a community. And for me, that's a very important question that I'd like to think about the whole year, is like, what is my contribution to not just the Burning Man community, but the communities I'm part of, right? Like, what's my gift to those communities? And I think that's a good question for everybody.
Yeah, I love that. And I believe a lot of folks are kind of waiting for somebody else to do it, and with a kind of a critical mindset. What I've seen in these dinner table communities, so we have tens of thousands of members, and I personally run 2 communities in person. Once a month, I meet with these families and their kids, and we do deep dives on different topics, like how to think about struggle and different types of struggle and see the value in it, because that's where the biggest opportunity always is, and a number of other things. And one community, after 9 months, and these are parents of a particular micro school, and their kids, when they come in after 9 months, I've seen the mindset completely change. Total enrollment in the school has increased about 70%. By the end of this year, it'll probably threefold from there, because the parents want to be part of this thing. And then I'm just watching this room, and it's growing. The first session in September for this community, there were 3 families, and now it's over 30 families, and there's 60 plus people. And it'll probably by the end of the year be over 150, something like that. And just watching the connections, they're dropping each other's kids off. The parents are more and more volunteering at the school. A number of them want to come in and be teachers. And the founder of the school and the leadership there said they've never seen this before. And all it was, I mean, here's a great curriculum to teach kids how to create value. But I think the most important work is creating this sense of community and strengthening it in the room. And that is wildly rewarding. You know, some people would say, because I don't charge anything for this, even as CEO of this company I took over, I don't charge them $1. It's about the mission. Well, you're so selfless. I'm like, well, I don't think that's possible. I feel amazing doing this. So selfishly, I like feeling good, and it's driving holistic value out into the world. So just kind of making a point here about how fast it can go in terms of strengthening community and just seeing the benefits from it.
Absolutely, yeah. It reminds me of a neighbor here. His name is Henry. He's he doesn't have he has a high school degree, yes, but he never went to college. He's always dressed in white, like a white T-shirt or a white hat, and he's 78, and he always walks throughout the neighborhood. And we call him the mayor of the community here, or the mayor of the neighborhood, because what he does is really incredible, because he looks out for everyone. He really kind of like knows everyone. That's the first thing. But he also looks out for people that, you know, some elderly people that haven't showed up, maybe, or he observes kind of like the garden or the front yard, kind of like if there's something left out, right? And so sometimes he knocks on doors and says like, "Hey, is everything okay?" Right? And people are really quickly opening up to him and saying like, "Yeah, actually, it's not okay, right? I can't walk anymore like I used to, or I feel lonely," or whatever that is they want to share with him. And most recently, when we had Henry over at our house, he shared with us that they're going to move, right? He and his wife, they don't have any kids. They're going to move to a different place in the US. And I asked them like, why are you moving, right? Like, because you just established yourself such in a helpful manner in this community here. And he said like, because there's 2 kids that need my help. And so they run actually an orphanage in South Africa for about 800 orphans. He and his wife, and they were taking care of 2 kids here in our neighborhood, and the family moved, and the parents cannot really take care of the two daughters, and so they decided to sell their house, move to a different place, just to take care of these two kids. And for me, that's incredible. Like, imagine being 78, right? Some people feel like, oh, the only thing that I need to do is nothing, right? They're now starting a whole new life, right? Trying to take care of two kids, but also get to know the new community they're going to be part of. They've never been there before. They don't know the area. And this is, for me, a great way of growing up and growing old, right? Because it keeps you curious. It keeps you open, right? It keeps you really alive, because the things that you do matter, right? They not just matter to you, but they matter to other people as well. And this, I think, is for me, it's a great role model to learn how to grow up, grow old, but also how you can build community and really contribute something that is meaningful.
Yeah. But I think the fastest way to grow old faster is to not do anything. Oh my
Absolutely,
God.
yeah.
Like, we have to take our brains and emotions to the gym every day, just like our bodies, if we want to keep going and stay younger longer and in the game, really. And so in reading your book, I've written so many notes here that are behind the screen, but one thing that stood out to me is, envisioning a future too far out can cause anxiety. And I got part of that from listening to some of your podcasts. And so the things I wrote down, uncertainty. Well, this is just a fact. There's not a lot of certainty when you're thinking about the future and going too far out. And then I wrote, know how you want to feel and what moving in that direction will be like. And then I sort of held it up and said, look, make better decisions in the now for a life that is more fulfilling through the adventure of uncertainty. So for me, it's all, again, like I talked about earlier, all these opportunities are everywhere, and how I show up and how I interact with those, knowing directionally how I want to feel is where I go. But talk about that anxiety, because a lot of folks have that. I have no idea what's going to happen in 10 years or 30 years or 50 years, and it freaks them out.
Yes, absolutely. Nobody does, right? Lee, that's the myth that some people might know what's going to happen in 10, 20, or 30 years, right? And they predict the future, right? I don't predict futures. And what I feel like is, as soon as people predict futures, I think they're creating a false sense of knowing what's going to happen next. And that is something that can be dangerous for a lot of people, right? Because imagine if I predict like something for 10 years and you make your decisions now based on that prediction, right? And then after 10 years, I might say like, oh, turned out to not be that way, or turned out to be different, which actually is true, right? About 97% of the predictions are not turning out to be true and to be, so what I observe is that sometimes we sit for the rest of our lives bracing for what happens next, when we could be making what happens best, right? And so for me, that is, take each moment to really understand, like, what can you do best now, instead of thinking about what could be happening in 10, 20, or 30 years, right? The interesting thing about our mind is that it loves to plan, right? We love to plan everything out, right? We love to plan our vacation, our relationship. We love to plan our health, right? In terms of like, if I'm going to go to the gym for the next, 15 years, I'm going to be fit. We love to plan, right? But I think instead of planning the future, we should prepare for the future, right? And I like your metaphor that you just said, like, we should take our brains and our bodies to the mental and to the physical gym every day, right? To really prepare for the future and be future ready. And that is something that I think not a lot of people invest in too much, right? Instead, they invest in plans and making those plans perfect, when they actually should prepare themselves for uncertainty, because the future by definition is uncertain. And that is something that we also have to learn to deal with, right? As we deal with uncertainty, we deal with change. We are actually, as human beings, a product of change, but we really have a hard time to understand change and to live with change, right? And there is this notion that everything changes all the time, right? That's the law of impermanence, right? It's a law of nature. And so trying to understand that more deeply, I think, is something that we can also learn. And so one of the classes at Stanford was called Navigating Uncertainty, right? Because that is really something that everybody can learn and become better at, and how you can navigate that uncertainty that is always when we think about the future, right? There is no certain thing about the future. None of it is certain. The only certain thing that maybe reduces the anxiety when thinking about that future horizon is when you get creative, when you start to act, right? So instead of like thinking about a future relationship that you want to have, right? Try to get active, right? Try to get out there and talk to people, right? Or if you want to have, if you're worried about your health, right? Try to make changes to your diet or to your exercise schedule or whatever that is, right? And that is, instead of like thinking about the future, you're trying to create the future, right? By the actions that you take in the moment. And that is something I think everybody can do to reduce their anxiety. Instead of thinking about like what could happen, think about like, what can I make happen right now? And what is in my control?
And do your best to feel the best through that, enjoy that. It's so obvious to say, if you're always living for the future, you're never going to be there. It won't matter. I mean, all we really have is right now. How many thousands of folks have talked about that, but how few people really even understand it. And maybe it's just really hard because it's hard. In your book, What's Next is Now, there's 6 key dimensions of a future-ready mindset. Radical optimism, unreserved openness, compulsive curiosity, perpetual experimentation, expansive empathy, and Dimension X, your unique superpower. So, Dimension X, I'm curious what yours is.
Yes. And so those dimensions that you just mentioned should sound familiar to everyone, right? Everybody knows what optimism is about, right? And probably experiences that a lot. Everybody knows what openness means, or curiosity and empathy and experimentation, right? For me, I want to offer people not something that they should change, but something that they should grow and grow in, right? That they should strengthen, ideally, right? And optimism, for example, is a choice that we can make, right? It's not that you're born as an optimist, right? It's a choice that we can make in every moment. And so the Dimension X, your unique superpower, is something that I want to help people to discover or rediscover, right? Because every human being has something that makes them unique, right? It's the way you communicate, the way you empathize. It could be like the way you connect ideas or connect people. And so my Dimension X at the moment, I think, is a bias towards action, right? I really don't like to overthink or overplan. I like just to go for it, right? Whenever an opportunity arises, I tell myself like, what's the best thing that can happen, right? And so really going for it and responding more often with a yes than a no, I think, is for me very important. And that is probably my unique superpower, that I just um, live that bias towards action, and don't overthink a lot of things. And I think that for me helps really to get into that action mode, into that mode where I feel like I'm making progress, I'm moving forward. None of it might be perfect, and that's okay, but at least I feel that I'm making progress. What could be your unique superpower, if I may ask that question back to you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When I got to that part of the book, and by the way, for everybody listening, I highly recommend that you read this book, What's Next is Now. And the first thing I wrote down is I lean into the hard because so few people do, and they seem to run away from it. But I go for it, and my level of being comfortable with being uncomfortable keeps growing every year. That also helps with my fulfillment. And I thought, well, that's about hard work. And I think even to a degree, it's bias for action. But then I wrote down, I think what the real superpower is simplifying complexity. And I get better and better at that over time. And I used to run so I've started 8 companies from scratch. One of the businesses had about 500 employees, a little bit more. We had 2,000 customers, 60 countries, wildly complex. And the way I thought about it was the most elegant win-win value creating solution is always simplicity on the other side of complexity. Like you really have to go through it and understand it. And then, people in meetings will talk for 15 minutes and I'll say, oh, it's this. And you just distilled it down to that thing. I think that's become probably my Dimension X or my superpower that keeps evolving.
Yeah, I think we all need that superpower more, because we're living in a very complex world. And sometimes we try to understand or make sense of that outside world, right? That is very complex, where we sometimes neglect that our inside world might be even more complex, right? And trying to find answers to those very big questions, like what's the meaning of life, right? And what's my purpose, or how do I want to be in the future, right? All of those questions are interesting in a way, because I don't think there's ever going to be an answer for it, right? It's only that you can find maybe a little bit more truth, a little bit more insight around like what is the meaning of your life, right? Like what is my purpose, or how do I want to be in the future, right? And I think creating that clarity, which I think is something that probably you shared when you think about complexity. I think having clarity is something very important. And for me, how I create clarity in my life is I go on these extensive silent meditation retreats, right? Where you just sit down on a small little cushion for 10 days, and you're just trying to observe your breath, right? That flows into your nose and out of your nose. And by doing that, you create a lot of clarity in your mind, right? You create clarity around like how emotions show up, how everything changes, right? From the pain in your hip to the pain in your shoulder, but also your mind and how that changes, how your emotions change over time. And for me, coming out of those extensive silent meditation retreats, I think gives me a little bit more clarity, or not just a little bit, I think gives me more clarity around what is my purpose, how do I want to be in the future, what's something I want to focus on, what creates fulfillment in my life, and so forth. So I highly recommend that if you want to have more clarity within yourself, I think just going quiet, and it doesn't mean that you're neglecting what's happening in the world or that you are stepping away from something. I think you're stepping into something, right? You're stepping into yourself to get more clarity around like what is really important to you.
So many thoughts coming up as you're talking through that. For me, it is so clear that the purpose of the human existence is to elevate human consciousness. That's it, because we figure more things out. You're pointing to it and what you're talking about. more insights, you're connecting more dots, you're doing all of that. There's no end to it. It's infinite how far we can go on that, as well as, I would say, the emotion of love. So wisdom and love and figuring more things out. Um, and having a purpose, I think, is really important to kind of guide your journey as you're figuring more things out. Whereas mine is about this holistic value creation. It's interesting. One of the deep dive sessions I do with families is helping kids discover their value creation superpowers. And some are really higher on one. They're all better in one than the other two, but they all should be in balance, in my opinion. It's better if they are. But some are business, some are emotional energy. They're just good at elevating that. Some are good at organizing, community events and doing things along those lines. So that dimension X and how you apply it. I think that's something we all should be thinking about. And I really have landed on, let's simplify complexity so we can create a lot more value in the world going out there.
Amazing.
I love how you've made me think more deeply about this stuff as I've gone through the book.
Thank you. Yes. I think that's a testimonial to yourself, right? A book can only go as deep as you allow it to go, and as much as time or energy you're investing in it, right? And so I chose the cover of the book very intentionally to be like a mirror that is at the same time a shape, and it reflects kind of like in different colors when you change your perspective. Because the three things that I want to communicate with that cover is, or maybe four things. The first thing is that you should always judge a book by its cover, right? Because that's the first kind of like thing you're noticing, right? And so I designed the cover intentionally, and the mirror is a reflection of yourself, right? So if you look at it, right, you don't see a very clear picture of yourself, right? You see kind of like a silhouette of like who you are. And that's, I think, the metaphor for how we think about our own future, right? It's not a clear picture that there is a path forward that is very clear, right? And, but as soon as you more often look into that mirror, I think the clearer the picture gets, right? The clearer around like, how do I want to feel in the future? How do I want to be in the future? Like, what future do I want to create? All of those questions become more clear. The second thing is around that shape. And so if you see that shape, right, it's something where you see that the future is not something that is a clear square or circle or something. It's shapeable, right? So it's in your hands to shape the future that you want to see happening, right? So that's the second. And you can already see kind of like the reflection changes as soon as you shift your perspective. As soon as you look at it like from a different perspective, from a different angle, right? A different kaleidoscope of colors, a different combination of colors will appear, which is usually a more beautiful one. So that's the message as well, is like, change your perspective, right? Look at a situation differently to see something new. So it's a mirror, it's a shape, and it's a kaleidoscope of colors that all represent that the future is in your hands, the future is shapeable, and the future will appear different if you shift your perspective.
Yeah, I love it. It's probably the most unique book cover I've ever seen. So, thank you for that. Going through the book, radical optimism, unreserved openness, all of this stuff, it's not where you're describing it, it's not a mindset that, oh, I have this mindset. It's applying it to actually create value. And one that really stood out to me, and I believe it's how I live, this expansive empathy. Everything I'm doing is about advancing the value we can create as humanity. And that's not to sound like it's a good thing that I'm doing. I mean, like, I really believe in what's possible. And I don't think, if I just take the United States, I don't think we have created even 10% of what's possible in the value we can create, because we're not focused on that. We're focused on other things. So expansive empathy going out, what I got from the book is everything's about advancing what we can do as humanity now and hopefully for hundreds of generations into the future and have it build on itself. Talk about that a little bit. I love that part of the book.
Empathy is such an important part in our lives because it helps us to literally just be better human beings, right? Because it helps us to understand other human beings on a deeper level. And it helps us to understand ourselves on a deeper level as well. There's empathy for others, but there's also empathy for ourselves, right? And probably the one that I am very excited about is empathy for your future self, right? How do you want to feel in the future? That is a question of empathy for your future self. What do I need in my future, right? I think that's something we don't think a lot about, right? Even if we grow older, really trying to understand, like, what are my emotional needs? What are my community needs? What are my physical needs in the future? And all of those are very empathetic questions that we can ask ourselves. And for me, it's all of those dimensions. I help people to understand and apply in their lives to be better prepared for the future is something that I'm very excited about, and that is how we can reimagine our education for helping people to prepare better for the future. Because education, I think, must shift from preparing for a test to preparing for uncertainty, right? And preparing for the unknown. And I think our education system is not doing that at the moment, right? I think we are preparing students for tests or for things that they should know in terms of knowledge or information, but we're not preparing them for the unknown. And I think that's um, really something that I want to focus on moving forward, because I don't think we need more answers. We need more explorers, right? We need more children. We need more people that really explore the world through wonder, that explore the world through questions and not worksheets, right? I think that's something we can now maybe focus on. Even that imagination that kids bring to everything in their lives is not part of any curriculum, right, that I've seen that probably should be, because imagination is something we bring back into the corporate world, right, into the world when we actually come out of an educational system that probably has driven out imagination or made our imagination dormant in some form or some way. And so for me, I really want to help to put optimism, to put openness, curiosity, experimentation, empathy on a curriculum as well, to help really reimagine what education could be.
Yeah. I like all of that, as well as let's actually add a whole bunch in there around just general life skills. What do you need to know to be a successful adult and navigate the world? And we don't do that. When I talk to families and larger groups of adults about this challenge, kids today in the current system are doing what they think they're supposed to do. They're not discovering what they were meant to do. And it just feels like, hey, get a good grade, get a diploma, get a degree, get a job. There is nothing inspiring about that at all. And everything you said, and from my view, and let's add some life skills stuff all the way through and understanding how the world works so you can make better decisions, all of it. And just backing up on Dimension X, I'm assuming it can evolve over time, right? When you said today mine is this, how has yours evolved over time?
Yes, absolutely. It evolves, right? Because your superpower, as you gain more experience, as you gain probably more perspectives on the world as well, I think your superpower might shift as well, right? And I think just doing that reflection work more often to think about, like, how has my superpower shifted from when I was 15 to when I was 30 or when I'm 45 or whatever it is an important exercise, right? And I think mine has evolved over time, and I'm sure that in the next years it might evolve as well, right? There might be another Dimension X or a superpower that is more dominant, that helps me really to to keep growing and keep evolving as a human being as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And for a lot of folks, they can approach discovering a superpower like it's this big thing they have to land on and that's it. So it's not that. It's what you can leverage right now that makes sense and then evolve into whatever the next thing is. I have enough notes and topics to talk about in front of me for 6 podcasts, by the way, and we don't have a lot of time left. One thing I wanted to touch on for our listeners that are running organizations out there, um, it's a 2-part question. One, what's the best way to create a culture of innovation? And 2, when you have that, and I would love to know what Google's innovation hopper system look like, so the best actual value creating things come out the other side in an organizing way and in an organized way. So establishing a culture of innovation and how do you capture it in an energizing way and not discourage people, because it's easy to do that too.
There's a couple of ways that I discovered that are really helpful when you want to create a culture where individuals and teams can really thrive, right? And they can experiment, they can try out the future, and they can create the future that they want to see happening. And one of the best starting points, I think, is to be able to let go, right? And that is something that is really for individuals and organizations hard to do, right? Because out of like many ideas that are put on the table or put on post-it notes or put on and are shared in an organization, right? Many of those fail, right? And many of those don't lead to the success that you want to see happening, right? It's, I think, in the 70% range, actually, that or people work on ideas that are actually not producing the results or producing the success that you want to see happening with those ideas. So letting go of those ideas and literally stepping away from those ideas is emotionally very hard for people, right? Because some people say that's, this idea or this job or what I'm working on is all I have, right? And I'm emotionally so attached to it that I don't want to let go. And so creating an environment where it's okay to let go of your idea and step away from it to step forward towards another idea and opening up for something new is very important. And that's just one part of an innovation culture that I think is very critical and very important. And you can create rituals around that, right? I think rituals are probably one of the best mechanisms to create cultures, right? And rituals we see in our communities that we talked about. We see it in families. We see it in sports communities. We see it in the religious communities and so forth. And trying to create rituals that really bring your values to life, I think, is one of the most important aspects of an innovation culture. So you can create a ritual that allows you to let go of ideas that didn't turn out to be successful, right? And at Google, we used a ritual called the Day of the Dead, the Dia del Muerto, the Spanish holiday, where you in many parts of this world, you let go of your ancestors, the people who died, right? And so we turned this ritual into something where we said, how can we use this ritual to help people in this organization to let go of their ideas that are not successful, right? And so came together one day, celebrated. We put a coffin in the middle of the room. We allowed people to put prototypes, post-it notes, business plans, whatever they had, into that coffin, and then we basically buried that, right? And we celebrated together the start of something new. And that was emotionally very hard for people because, right, you at that time trying to step away from an idea you've worked on for a couple of months or a couple of years that you really felt that could potentially change the world, right? And celebrating that is, I think, very, very important for people. And so that is one ritual that you can use to really create a culture where you come together to let go, and at the same time to be open for something new and make room for something new as well, right? Because an organization can't work on 100 ideas or 1,000 ideas at the same time, right? You always have to check and see which of those ideas do we want to let go and put to the side to make room for something new. Another ritual I think is something that I created is the Penguin Award, right? Rewarding somebody for taking a risk. In nature, penguins are very fascinating because there's always one penguin that jumps first into the water, the courageous penguin, having a chance to find food or become food, right? A 50% chance. And the rest of the colony very patiently waits until that penguin comes up again, hopefully finding some food. And so in an organization, you can reward people for taking risks, jumping into the water first. And the Penguin Award was really given to that person who tried something new, who took a risk. And so that's just two rituals that you can use in an organization to create a culture of innovation, right? And now the creative task is that what are some of the other rituals that you can create and think of that really bring your own values in an organization to life, right? The values of collaboration, value of um, um, customer focus, the value of success, the value of taking risks, the value of courage, for example, right? All of those values are existing in organizations. And whenever I go into an organization, I'll try to help the organization to create those rituals that really allow them to shape and design and curate a culture that really is helping them to innovate. So that's just one of the aspects probably for creating a culture, which I think is fascinating because you can always come up with these new rituals, try them out, experiment with those, and see like how is the culture actually changing or shifting. The other thing I would say is really invest in your people around those dimensions that we just talked about, right? Optimism, openness, curiosity, experimentation, empathy. All of those lead to innovation. They lead to more opportunities, and you can train people in those things and help them to develop what I call a future-ready mind state that allows individuals to create the future that they want to see happening.
Yeah, love that. Those are really practical tools, and I also love the quote in the book where I believe you said attachment is the enemy of innovation. 100% agree. It can be for sure, and sometimes holding on to it long enough when everybody else wants to throw it away and it comes out the other side, wow, that really worked. That can be interesting as well. So there's a fine line there. And my definition of innovation is any improvement in how something creates value. So it can be a micro improvement. That's innovation. Everybody in any organization can do that, or something all the way to changing humanity in a really good way. So it could be micro to macro. And I'm curious, as we're kind of running out of time here, Frederik, was there any big takeaway in this conversation for you? The biggest one for me, there's so many, and I'm going to go back and listen to this. Making what happens best. Love that quote. Was there any big takeaway for you in our discussion?
Many, yes. I think first, I like to focus on communities and seeing communities not just as something that is, a neighborhood community or sports community, whatever it is, but really seeing that as something that is really part of our lives, right? And how we can influence those communities and how we can focus on having better relationships, and what we all can do to build better communities, because that has an effect on larger communities then as well, right? If you invest in your neighborhood community, right, your city community might change, and then your country might change, and then the world might change, right? And you can only start within your small community to make those impacts and those shifts. And I think that was for me a great reminder. And then the second one is that focus on emotions, right? And focus on what do I want to feel in the future and how do I want to feel in the future? I think is such an important question that we all need to think about more, that helps us to have a different relationship with the future, because then we're not thinking about a perfect plan, or we think about a prediction. We think about a goal. We think about an emotion, right? And that is something that we can, I think, control a little bit more, right? Because if I want to feel more kind in the future, let's say that as an example, or feel more loved in the future, right? Ask yourself, what can you do in this moment to move towards that, right? And there's many things that you can do to feel more kind in your future, or to feel more loved in the future. Little things that go a long way, that allow you to create exactly the future that you want to see happening.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And if our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing and connect with you, what's the best way to do that, Frederik?
Yes, you can find me anywhere. There is probably like two things that you might enjoy. One is a Next Letter. It's a bi-weekly newsletter called Next Letter. I call it the one-to-one with your future. So it's really your private meeting, your private time, your time to explore one question, two perspectives, and one experiment around the future that you want to create. And that comes out every 2 weeks on Fridays. And so if that's too long of a time in between, there's also a podcast coming out the other Friday. It's called The Future is How. And we explore really that question, how can you create a better future? Through sleep, through nutrition, through leadership, through creativity, through beauty, through all of those different things that allow us to create a better future for ourselves. So that's probably two ways to find out more, and hopefully find some value in creating your future.
Yeah, and for sure, read your book, What's Next is Now. I recommend that for everyone. Frederik, thanks so much for being here. I really admire how your mind works, and thanks here. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee, for having me.
Yeah, and this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And until next time, show your value.